Did people really believe a wandering womb caused barrenness? What did the stars have to say about making a baby? In the Mycenaean period, from roughly 500 AD to 1500 AD, marriage and children were central, and the path to fertility was paved with beliefs that might shock you today. Number 10. The myth of the wandering womb. For centuries, across ancient lands and into the mythical world, a deep-seated belief about the female anatomy held sway. It was the idea that the uterus or womb was not a fixed organ within a woman's body, but rather a creature with a life of its own, capable of moving around freely. This wandering womb, it was believed, was the source of countless female afflictions, especially those connected to fertility and mental well-being. This ancient concept, rooted in the medical writings of Hippocrates and Plato in classical antiquity, was passed down through the ages and thoroughly integrated into medieval medical understanding, shaping how physicians and ordinary people approached women's health and childbearing. Physicians in the medieval era, relying on translated texts from Greek and Roman authors, truly accepted this idea. They taught that the uterus, when empty and deprived of its natural moisture and heat conditions thought to be common in women who were not conceiving or carrying a child, would begin to wander. It was believed to move upwards, seeking moisture and air, sometimes even pressing against vital organs like the heart or brain. This upward migration was thought to cause a range of symptoms from shortness of breath and fainting spells, often described as suffocation of the womb, to more severe mental disturbances that medieval texts sometimes called hysteria. Connection to fertility was direct. If the womb was not in its proper place, it could not receive or hold the seed necessary for conception, making childbearing impossible. Proposed solutions for this roving organ were as varied as they were inventive, all aimed at either luring the uterus back to its correct position or driving it away from dangerous areas. One common method involved fumigation. Physicians would prescribe a combination of pleasant and foul odors to guide the womb. Sweet-smelling substances, such as civet, frankincense, or sweet wine, would be applied to the lower parts of the body, often near the vagina, to attract the uterus downwards, back to its natural place in the pelvis. Conversely, unpleasant smells, like burnt feathers, asa fetida, or even excrement, would be held near the woman's nose. The theory here was that the womb would recoil from the foul odor and descend away from the head and chest. This dual approach of attraction and repulsion was a standard therapeutic strategy. Beyond smells, physical manipulations were also employed. Women might be advised to lie in specific postures or to undergo external pressure on their abdomen to encourage the womb to settle. There were also instances of using pessaries, which were objects inserted into the vagina, often made of linen wrapped around herbs, or wool soaked in pleasant-smelling oils intended to physically keep the uterus in place, or to provide it with the moisture it was supposedly seeking. Tratula, a significant collection of medieval texts on women's medicine, even detailed methods for using weights or applying pressure to the abdomen to encourage a misplaced womb to return. The general understanding was that a woman who could not conceive might simply have a uterus that was not cooperating, not staying where it should for the important work of carrying a baby. The impact of this belief extended beyond the medical community. Ordinary people, including husbands and wives, would have been aware of this theory. When a couple struggled with infertility, the wandering womb offered a plausible explanation, one that put the fault in the woman's physical body rather than her moral character or any divine displeasure. A woman who was experiencing fainting or other seemingly unrelated symptoms, in addition to not conceiving, might very well be told by a local healer or a more learned physician that her womb was the culprit. This belief provided a framework for understanding many female ailments, and often led to treatments that, while perhaps not effective by modern standards, were deeply rooted in the prevailing medical knowledge of the time. The focus was always on restoring balance and proper function to this supposedly independent and active organ, ensuring it could fulfill its ultimate purpose of childbearing within the marriage. Number 9. Astrological timing for conception. In the medieval period, the night sky was not just a collection of twinkling lights. It was a vast cosmic clock, a divine blueprint that influenced every aspect of human life from agricultural cycles to personal destiny. This profound belief in astrology extended deeply into matters of health, fortune, and especially fertility and childbearing within marriage. It was widely held that the planetary alignments, the phases of the moon, and the positions of the zodiac signs at the moment of conception could determine not only the likelihood of a successful pregnancy, but also the gender, health, and even the future character of the child. For couples desperate to conceive or to ensure a specific outcome, consulting the stars was as natural as seeking advice from a physician or a priest. Astrologers, who were often learned men and sometimes even physicians themselves, were consulted to pinpoint the most auspicious times for sexual intercourse if the goal was conception. They would meticulously calculate the positions of the planets, particularly the benefic planets like Jupiter and Venus, and assess their aspects, the angles they formed with each other. A strong, well-placed moon was considered crucial, as it governed moisture and growth properties essential for a healthy pregnancy. Saturn, on the other hand, was often viewed with caution, as its cold and dry nature was thought to hinder fertility. Conception under the malefic influence of Mars or Saturn was feared to result in a sickly child, or even a miscarriage. People believed that a wise couple would never simply leave conception to chance. They would align their efforts with the cosmic rhythms. The zodiac signs also played a significant role. Specific signs were thought to be more fertile than others. Watery signs like Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, associated with abundance and fluidity, were considered highly favorable for conception. Earth signs such as Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn were also viewed as good, representing stability and nurturing qualities. Conversely, fiery signs like Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius were sometimes considered less fertile or associated with more difficult births, while airy signs like Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius were thought to be neutral or sometimes even detrimental to conception due to their dry nature. An astrologer might advise a couple to delay intercourse until the moon moved into a fertile sign, or until Jupiter or Venus were strongly positioned in the ascendant or in a house associated with children. Beyond the general planetary positions, specific planetary hours and days were also considered. Each hour of the day and night was ruled by a particular planet, and certain days of the week were also assigned planetary rulership. For instance, Venus, the planet of love and fertility, ruled Friday. Therefore, conceiving on a Friday during an hour ruled by Venus, especially when the moon was in a fertile sign and aspects were favorable, was thought to maximize the chances of conception and ensure a harmonious outcome. This detailed approach demonstrates the depth of belief in cosmic influence. Every specific moment carried a unique astrological signature, and understanding this signature was key to manipulating destiny. Medieval medical texts, often blending medicine with astrology, sometimes included tables or guidelines for optimal conception times. A physician might recommend a specific day and hour, taking into account the woman's menstrual cycle in conjunction with the planetary influences. For example, some texts suggested that conception was most likely to occur after menstruation, particularly during the waxing moon, when the moon was growing fuller. Combining this lunar phase with a strong, fertile astrological chart was believed to provide the best possible conditions for a successful pregnancy and the birth of a healthy, fortunate child. The belief was that the moment of conception was when the seed of a human being was infused with the cosmic energies that would shape their entire life, making the timing critically important for any couple hoping for a child. Number 8. Dietary influence on sex of child. In the medieval world, the desire for a male heir was often intense, driven by matters of inheritance, lineage, and social standing. While people understood that fertility itself was a complex matter, they also held strong beliefs about influencing the sex of a child after conception occurred, or even in preparation for it. One prevalent myth revolved around the idea that the diet of the parents, particularly the mother, could determine whether the couple would conceive a boy or a girl. This belief was rooted in the prevailing humoral theory of medicine, which held that the human body was composed of 4 primary humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, each associated with specific qualities, like hot and cold, wet and dry. Achieving a balance of these humors was central to health, and manipulating them through diet was thought to influence the very nature of the child. The general consensus was that warmth and dryness were associated with masculinity, while coolness and wetness were linked to femininity. Therefore, if a couple desired a boy, the advice often focused on increasing the heat and dryness in the bodies of both parents, especially the mother. This meant consuming foods that were considered hot and dry. Spices like ginger, cinnamon, and pepper were highly valued for their heating properties. Meats, particularly red meats, were also thought to be warming and nourishing, contributing to a robust constitution believed necessary for producing a male child. Strong wines and other spirituous beverages were sometimes suggested, as they were also believed to increase internal heat. The idea was to create an internal environment that favored the development of a masculine seed, one that was strong and vital. Conversely, if a girl was desired, or if a couple already had several boys and wished for a daughter, the dietary recommendations would shift towards foods considered cool and wet. Vegetables, fruits, and lighter fare were often suggested. Foods like lettuce, cucumbers, and watery fruits were believed to cool the body and increase its moistness, thus favoring the conception of a female child. And dairy products such as milk and cheese were also often categorized as cooling and moistening. The goal was to prepare the body, particularly the mother's, to produce the kind of seed that would result in a female offspring, a process sometimes linked to the humors and their specific temperatures. This dietary advice was often combined with other lifestyle recommendations. For instance, moderate physical activity was sometimes encouraged for prospective parents of a boy, as it was thought to generate heat. For a girl, a more tranquil and less strenuous lifestyle might be suggested. The timing of intercourse in relation to meals was also sometimes considered, with some suggesting that a meal of hot foods immediately before intercourse might increase the chances of conceiving a boy. These beliefs show how deeply people thought about the interplay between their bodies, their environment, and the ultimate outcome of reproduction. Beyond general classifications of hot and cold foods, specific items were sometimes highlighted. For example, medieval texts occasionally mentioned the consumption of the testicles of certain animals by the male, or specific herbs by the female, all aiming to shift the balance towards the desired gender. While such detailed prescriptions might not have been widespread, the fundamental idea that food could sway the very nature of conception was a powerful and persistent one. For medieval couples, a diet was not just about sustenance. It was a tool, a way to participate actively in shaping the family they hoped to create, especially when it came to bringing a coveted son or a desired daughter into the world. Number 7. Charms and amulets for fertility. In the medieval world, where life was often unpredictable and divine intervention was seen in every turn of fortune, people sought solace and help through various means. When it came to the profound desire for children within marriage and the heartbreak of infertility, relying on tangible objects endowed with special powers was a common practice. Charms and amulets, often consecrated by religious figures, blessed through rituals, or simply believed to possess inherent magical properties, were worn, carried, or placed strategically in the marital home to enhance fertility and ensure successful childbearing. These items were not mere trinkets. They were seen as vital conduits of power, bridging the gap between the earthly realm and the unseen forces that governed conception and birth. One widely accepted type of charm involved Christian relics. Fragments of saints' bones, pieces of cloth that had touched a holy person, or even soil from a sacred pilgrimage site were highly revered. It was believed that the holiness of the saint infused these objects with miraculous power, capable of influencing the natural world. A barren woman might wear a small pouch containing a relic near her abdomen, or sleep with it under her pillow, hoping that the saint's intercession would bless her with a child. Specific saints like Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary, were particularly invoked for aid in conception and childbirth, and their relics were especially prized for this purpose. The act of touching or wearing such an object was a physical manifestation of prayer and faith, an appeal to the divine for the gift of offspring. Beyond formal religious relics, various natural objects were also believed to possess inherent fertility-enhancing qualities. Certain stones, for example, were thought to be particularly potent. Jasper, a red or green stone, was often associated with blood and life, and was sometimes worn by women hoping to conceive. Agate was another stone believed to promote fertility and ensure a safe pregnancy. These stones might be fashioned into simple pendants, carried in a pocket, or even placed near the marital bed. Their perceived power stemmed from their appearance, origin, or perhaps ancient folklore, passed down through generations. People believed that these natural materials, formed deep within the earth, held a raw primal energy that could be harnessed for human reproduction. Animal parts also found their way into fertility charms. For instance, the hooves of a hare or a wolf's teeth were sometimes incorporated into amulets, reflecting the animal's known fecundity or predatory strength. The belief was that, by carrying a part of a prolific animal, a person could absorb some of its reproductive vigor. While some of these practices bordered on what the Church might consider superstition or even paganism, many were deeply embedded in folk medicine and local customs practiced alongside more orthodox religious devotions. People were often pragmatic, using whatever means they believed might work to achieve such a fundamental human desire as having children. Written charms, often short prayers or invocations inscribed on parchment or metal, were another common form of amulet. These might contain biblical verses, specific prayers to saints, or even magical symbols. They were often rolled up, placed in a small container, and worn around the neck or wrist. The very act of writing down holy words was believed to imbue them with power, protecting the wearer from evil influences that might hinder conception or cause miscarriage, and drawing divine favor for fertility. For medieval couples, these charms and amulets were not just symbols of hope. They were active tools, part of a larger system of beliefs and practices aimed at navigating the uncertainties of life and securing the blessing of children within their marriage. Number 6. Supernatural interventions, saints and demons. The medieval world was profoundly shaped by its understanding of the spiritual realm. For medieval people, God, angels, saints, and demons were not abstract concepts, but active forces, influencing daily life, including the most intimate and vital aspects, like marriage and childbearing. When a couple struggled with fertility, or when a pregnancy faced complications, the explanation often extended beyond the physical body to the intervention of supernatural powers. It was widely believed that conception, a successful pregnancy, and a healthy birth were gifts from God, often mediated by the prayers of saints. But equally, infertility, miscarriage, and infant death could be attributed to the malevolent interference of demons or divine displeasure. Saints were powerful intercessors, seen as friends of God who could appeal on behalf of mortals. For couples longing for children, invoking specific saints was a primary method of seeking divine aid. Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary, was perhaps the most prominent patron saint for fertility and safe childbirth. Women would undertake pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to Saint Anne, pray to her, or commission votive offerings in her honor, hoping that her prayers would open their wombs. Other saints like Saint Gerard Mahella, though later or local saints known for miracles involving children, were also widely invoked. The stories of saints performing miracles, including causing barren women to conceive, were widespread and reinforced the belief in their power to intervene directly in human reproductive struggles. This was not just a passive prayer. It was an active seeking of a supernatural force to alter their physical reality. Conversely, the absence of children or repeated pregnancy loss was often attributed to demonic interference or the machinations of witches, who were believed to be in league with demons. Demons were thought to inflict various ills upon humanity, and hindering conception or causing miscarriages was certainly within their perceived capabilities. A woman who repeatedly miscarried might be suspected of being afflicted by a demonic presence, or perhaps even of being targeted by a witch's curse. Rituals of exorcism or protective spells, sometimes performed by priests or local cunning folk, might be employed to drive away these malevolent forces and restore fertility. The belief in witches, who could bind the womb through spells or curses, was a dark counterpart to the hopeful prayers to saints. These accusations often arose during periods of social anxiety or unexplained misfortune within a community. Divine displeasure was another powerful explanation for infertility. If a couple was living in sin, or if they had committed some transgression against God or the Church, it was believed that God might withhold the blessing of children as a form of punishment or a call to repentance. This could place immense spiritual and psychological burden on childless couples, who might undertake rigorous penance, increased prayer, or acts of charity to prove their piety and earn God's favor. Monasteries and convents often received requests for prayers for fertility, reflecting the pervasive belief that a community's collective piety could influence divine grace for individuals. The connection between spiritual purity and physical fertility was deeply ingrained in medieval thought. The Church played a significant role in navigating these supernatural beliefs. While condemning overt magical practices and witchcraft, it encouraged devotion to saints and emphasized the importance of prayer and good living. Priests would often advise couples to confess their sins, take communion, and pray fervently for children, reinforcing the idea that fertility was ultimately a divine gift. For medieval couples, the struggle for children was therefore not just a medical or physical challenge, but also a spiritual battle, fought with prayers, piety, and an awareness of the unseen forces that shaped their very lives and the future of their family. Number 5. The perfect time for intercourse. In the medieval period, the act of marital intercourse, while essential for procreation, was not viewed simply as a spontaneous act of intimacy. Instead, it was often framed within a complex web of religious, medical, and astrological considerations, particularly when the goal was conception. There was a strong belief that specific timings influenced by the woman's menstrual cycle, the phases of the moon, and even prohibitions against certain days could significantly impact the likelihood of conception and the health of the resulting child. This detailed approach to timing reflects a persistent human desire to control and optimize outcomes, even in areas where understanding was limited. Primary biological marker recognized was the woman's menstrual cycle. While the exact science of ovulation was unknown, medieval physicians and common folk alike understood that conception was most likely to occur after menstruation had ceased. Texts like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a widely influential medical treatise from the school of Salerno, often advised that the most fertile period was shortly after the woman's menstrual flow had ended. The idea was that the womb was then cleansed and ready to receive and nurture the male seed. Some even believed that the womb was thirsty after bleeding and thus more receptive to the male contribution. This period was therefore considered the prime window for conjugal relations if a child was desired. Beyond the menstrual cycle, the moon's phases were thought to exert a powerful influence. The waxing moon, meaning the period when the moon was growing fuller, was generally considered more auspicious for conception. The moon was associated with moisture, growth, and fertility, and its increasing light was believed to correspond with an increase in natural vitality. Therefore, engaging in intercourse during the waxing moon, especially when combined with the postmenstrual window, was thought to maximize the chances of conceiving. Conversely, the waning moon, or the period when the moon was decreasing, was sometimes seen as less fertile or even detrimental to conception, perhaps due to its association with decay and diminishing returns. Religious prohibitions also played a significant role in dictating the perfect time. The Church imposed numerous restrictions on marital relations. Intercourse was forbidden on Sundays, feast days, during Lent, and on various other holy days. It was also prohibited on fast days, during the time a woman was menstruating and after childbirth for a certain period. While these prohibitions were primarily for spiritual reasons, to promote chastity, penance, and reverence for holy times, they also indirectly influenced conception patterns. Couples were thus forced to plan their intimate lives around the ecclesiastical calendar. Breaking these rules was considered sinful, and some believed that a child conceived in sin might be sickly or otherwise unfortunate. This meant that the perfect time for conception was not just biologically or astrologically optimal, but also morally permissible according to church doctrine. Moreover, the physical state of the couple, particularly the male, was sometimes considered important. It was thought that the male seed was strongest after a period of abstinence, as this allowed it to accumulate and become more potent. Therefore, a short period of celibacy leading up to the perfect fertile window was occasionally recommended. This combination of postmenstrual timing, a waxing moon, adherence to religious strictures, and careful preparation of the body created a complex set of guidelines for medieval couples seeking to bring a new life into their marriage. The overall belief was that by aligning their actions with these natural and divine rhythms, they could increase their chances of conceiving a healthy child. Number 4. Purity and sin's role in conception. In the medieval Christian worldview, morality and physical well-being were inextricably linked. Sickness, misfortune, and even barrenness were often interpreted not merely as physical ailments, but as consequences of sin or a lack of divine favor. This pervasive belief deeply influenced how medieval couples understood fertility and childbearing within marriage. It was widely held that purity, both spiritual and physical, was essential for conception, and that sin, whether individual or ancestral, could directly impede the gift of children. This placed an immense spiritual burden on childless couples, often driving them to seek penance, increased prayer, and a more devout life in their quest for offspring. The concept of sin affecting fertility stemmed from biblical narratives and theological teachings. The Old Testament often depicted barrenness as a divine punishment or a trial, eventually overcome through prayer and piety, as seen in the stories of Sarah, Rebecca, and Hannah. This interpretation carried over into the medieval period, reinforcing the idea that a woman's closed womb might be a sign of God's displeasure. It was not always seen as personal sin, but sometimes as a collective or inherited sin, or even as a test of faith. Nevertheless, the prevailing solution was often a spiritual one, seeking forgiveness and living a life pleasing to God. Beyond general piety, specific sins were sometimes thought to hinder conception. Lust, in its unbridled or non-procreative forms, was considered especially problematic. While marital intercourse was deemed permissible and even encouraged for procreation, any deviation from its purpose or prescribed manner could be considered sinful. For instance, any form of contraception or attempt to prevent conception was strictly condemned by the Church as a mortal sin. It was believed that engaging in such acts could anger God and lead to barrenness as a consequence. Confession and repentance were therefore seen as crucial steps for couples struggling with infertility, a way to cleanse their souls and open the path for divine blessing. Purity extended to the physical body as well, though often framed through a spiritual lens. The idea that a woman needed to be clean after menstruation before conception could occur was partly a practical observation of timing, but also carried a ritualistic purity aspect. Engaging in intercourse while a woman was menstruating was considered a sin and was often believed to result in sickly or deformed children. Similarly, various rules around intercourse during holy seasons, fasts, or Sundays were enforced not just for reverence, but also out of a belief that conception under such impure circumstances would be ill-fated. The very act of conception, therefore, was ideally performed within a framework of spiritual cleanliness and adherence to religious law. For couples struggling to conceive, the emphasis on sin and purity could be a heavy weight. They might undergo rigorous self-examination, increased fasting, extended prayers, and visits to holy shrines. Charitable acts were also sometimes performed as a way to earn spiritual merit and demonstrate devotion. The belief was that by aligning their lives more closely with God's will, by purging sin and embracing purity, they could remove any divine obstacles to conception and receive the precious gift of children. This intertwining of faith, morality, and fertility reflected a worldview where the physical world was constantly influenced by the spiritual, and human actions had profound consequences for both body and soul. Number 3. Beliefs about barrenness, fault of the woman or witchcraft. In the medieval period, the inability of a married couple to have children, particularly the inability of the wife to conceive or carry a pregnancy to term, was almost exclusively attributed to the woman. While modern science understands that male infertility plays a significant role in about half of all cases, medieval thought rarely considered the man to be the primary cause of barrenness. Instead, explanations for a childless marriage were deeply intertwined with prevailing medical theories, social anxieties, and sometimes the dark suspicion of witchcraft. For a medieval woman, being barren was not just a personal sorrow. It could be a social stigma, a source of familial pressure, and even a cause for legal dissolution of marriage or accusations of demonic interference. The medical understanding of the time, rooted in ancient Greek and Roman texts, often focused on the woman's body as the site of reproductive function. If a woman was barren, it was thought there must be a defect in her seed, her womb, or her humors. Imbalance of the humors, too hot or too cold, too wet or too dry, was frequently cited as a cause. A womb that was too dry, for example, might not be able to nourish the seed, or a womb that was too moist might drown it. Other physical explanations included a closed or blocked womb, a uterus that was malformed, or one that was too slippery to hold the male seed. These explanations, while incorrect, were part of the accepted medical science and placed the responsibility firmly on the woman's physiology. Beyond physical explanations, moral and spiritual factors often came into play. As discussed earlier, sin was frequently blamed for barrenness. A woman might be believed to be barren because of her own personal sins, the sins of her ancestors, or even the general moral failing of the community. This led to women undertaking penance, prayer, and pilgrimage to seek divine favor. The stigma attached to barrenness could be immense, as children were seen as a divine blessing and a sign of God's favor. Childless woman might be seen as spiritually lacking or even cursed. Perhaps the most sinister explanation for barrenness was witchcraft. As the medieval period progressed, and particularly during the late medieval and early modern witch hunts, the idea that a witch could bind a woman's womb or prevent conception through magic became a terrifyingly real belief. If a couple had tried everything, prayers, charms, medical remedies, and still remained childless, the desperate search for an explanation could lead to accusations of witchcraft. A jealous neighbor, an outcast woman, or someone who had previously had a dispute with the barren woman might be suspected of having cast a spell to prevent her from having children. This belief reflected a profound fear of hidden, malevolent forces at work in the world. The legal and social consequences of barrenness for a woman could be severe. In some cases, chronic barrenness was grounds for a husband to seek an annulment or divorce, especially if the marriage was arranged for the purpose of producing heirs. This put immense pressure on women to conceive. While male infertility was rarely considered, some nuanced discussions did exist about male seed quality, or potency. However, even then, the ultimate failure to conceive was almost always attributed to the female body's inability to receive or nurture that seed. For the medieval woman, the burden of fertility rested heavily on her shoulders, whether due to perceived physical flaws, moral failings, or the dark shadow of malevolent magic. Number 2. Rituals for predicting or ensuring gender. The medieval desire for a male heir was a powerful societal force, driven by the need to continue family lines, inherit property, and secure social standing. While people believed in dietary and astrological influences on a child's sex, they also engaged in various rituals, both before and during conception, to either predict the gender of an unborn child or to actively influence it. These rituals ranged from observational practices grounded in folk wisdom to more active, sometimes bizarre, procedures, all reflecting the deep human desire to control the outcome of reproduction. One common way to predict the gender of an existing pregnancy involved observing the mother's body and the characteristics of the pregnancy. For example, if a pregnant woman carried high or seemed to be wider in the hips, it was often thought to indicate a girl. Conversely, a low carriage or a more pointed forward projecting belly was believed to signify a boy. The mother's complexion was also sometimes a predictor. A ruddy or more vibrant appearance was linked to a male child, while a pale or sapped look might suggest a girl. The idea was that a girl would steal the mother's beauty, while a boy would enhance it. These were observational folk beliefs, passed down through generations, offering expectant parents a way to guess at their child's gender. Beyond mere observation, active rituals were often employed to ensure the conception of a boy. One belief held that the stronger or more powerful partner contributed the dominant characteristics to the child. Therefore, the husband might be encouraged to consume hot and strong foods, as discussed earlier, and perhaps even to exert more physical dominance during intercourse. Some medieval texts hinted at positions during intercourse believed to favor the conception of a male, often involving the woman lying on her right side after coitus, as the right side of the body was traditionally associated with masculinity and strength. The logic was that the male seed, after being introduced, would then find its way to the boy-producing side of the womb. Another fascinating, though less common ritual, involved the use of certain substances or actions directly influencing the seed. For instance, some medieval folk remedies suggested that a man should drink a concoction containing herbs or even animal parts believed to enhance male potency or direct the creation of a male child. There were also superstitious practices, such as placing a knife or an axe under the marital bed or placing certain objects on one side of the bed, all thought to create a more masculine environment for conception. These were not based on medical understanding, but rather on symbolic magic, where objects imbued with masculine associations were thought to influence the outcome. The concept of a boy-producing and girl-producing side of the womb was also present in some medieval medical thought, though it was largely a theoretical construct without anatomical basis. It was sometimes believed that the right side of the uterus produced males and the left side produced females. Thus, advice might be given for the woman to lie on her right side after intercourse, if a boy was desired to encourage the male seed to settle in the correct part of the womb. These beliefs, while lacking scientific validity, offered medieval couples a sense of agency and control over a process that otherwise felt mysterious and left to chance. They were tangible actions taken in the hope of fulfilling the profound social and personal desire for a male heir. Number 1. The role of male seed quality and quantity. While much of medieval fertility belief centered on the woman, the male contribution to conception was certainly not ignored. It was widely understood that the man provided the seed, the vital essence that initiated life. However, the quality and quantity of this seed were thought to be crucial factors, and beliefs surrounding them influenced recommendations for male behavior, diet, and even the perfect timing for intercourse. The prevailing medical and philosophical understanding of the time held that a strong, abundant, and pure male seed was essential for successful conception and the creation of a healthy child. Medieval medical theories, largely derived from Galenic principles, posited that the male seed, or sperm, was a refined product of the man's entire body, a distillation of his humors and life force. Therefore, anything that weakened a man's overall constitution was believed to diminish the quality and quantity of his seed. Excessive indulgence in food or drink, debauchery, or a generally unhealthy lifestyle was thought to produce a weak, deficient seed, making conception difficult or leading to a sickly offspring. Conversely, a temperate life, a balanced diet, and robust health were believed to generate a potent and abundant seed, crucial for successful procreation. The idea was that the father passed on his essence directly, and if that essence was flawed, so too would be the child. Quantity was also considered important. It was believed that a sufficient amount of seed was necessary to successfully implant and develop within the woman's womb. This led to recommendations for periods of abstinence before intercourse aimed at conception. The idea was that refraining from sexual activity for a few days would allow the male seed to accumulate and become more potent and voluminous. This practice was meant to ensure that when intercourse did occur, there would be an ample supply of high-quality seed, increasing the chances of successful conception. This advice often intertwined with religious recommendations for sexual moderation, aligning physical efficacy with spiritual virtue. The heat of the male seed was another significant factor in medieval thought, particularly concerning the sex of the child. As discussed earlier, warmth was often associated with masculinity. Therefore, a man's seed that was believed to be hotter and more vigorous was thought to be more likely to produce a boy. This belief influenced dietary recommendations for men, urging them to consume hot foods like spices and strong meats if they desired a male heir. The vigor and vitality of the male partner during intercourse were also sometimes mentioned, reflecting the idea that a strong emission of robust warm seed was paramount for conception, especially of a male child. While male infertility was rarely acknowledged as a distinct medical condition in the same way as female barrenness, a man's inability to produce sufficient or good quality seed was sometimes discussed. Such discussions might hint at a man being cold or weak in his humors, leading to a sterile or ineffective seed. In rare cases, more extreme explanations, such as a man being bewitched to lose his vigor, might arise, though direct male barrenness was far less common in explanations than female barrenness. Ultimately, for medieval couples striving to have children, the man's contribution of a strong, plentiful, and vital seed was seen as an indispensable component of the reproductive process, a reflection of his own health and, by extension, the health of his lineage.